Hi, I'm Stephen Carson, coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Welcome to back to the series on class, featuring the book Class by Paul Fussell, A Guide Through the American Status System. I think it is just fascinating, funny, and this week, at least for me, a bit painful. He lets all the classes have it, but I feel like the middle class, of which I am certainly a part, really gets blasted this time. Anyway, we'll get to that later in the show. Support for the show gratefully received at Subscribestar. Go to the YouTube video description if you're watching on Twitter to find the link to that. And I think I'm ready to go. Okay, let's do this. So, as last time, I'm going to help you follow what he's talking about by putting his classification system on the screen. So he has the top out of sight. In the upper classes, he has the top out of sight. These are the people whose homes are, you don't see them. There's a long drive, long curved drive to get to their house, maybe a gate in front of it to stop people just wandering in. So they're out of sight, right? They're the top out of sight. These people live on primarily on money from inheritance, not from income. Then you get to the upper and upper middle classes, who will have as you go down, more of a mix of their own income as opposed to inheritance, but they're making a high income probably. Then you have the middle and proletarian. And he distinguishes high, mid, and low proletarian. We'll see some of that today. And then at the bottom, you have the destitute. And then the destitute would be, I guess, like homeless, maybe? So I'm a little unclear whether he'd put homeless. He calls bottom out of sight because you don't see them. They're in institutions and stuff. So I think homeless would be the destitute. And the bottom out of sight are, in prisons and mental wards. And I don't know. Being cared for somewhere. Okay, so lightning quick introduction. If you want to understand that better, go to the first episode in the series. The whole series, by the way, is linked in the YouTube video description. I've got the playlist. And the very first episode is called Class, and he introduces these class distinctions in more detail. We'll just be using them. So, what we're going to talk about is 2 chapters from his book. One is called The Life of the Mind, and one is called Speak That I May See. So it's about how people of different classes are educated, what they read, how they write, and then a whole chapter on how different classes speak, as suggested by My Fair Lady, based in turn on the play Pygmalion. There is a lot of what class you're in is given away by how you phrase things, what words you use. And he goes into great, hilarious, and for me, often painful detail in that chapter. Hopefully we will get to it today. But let's rock. So, remember, this book is very specifically about America, which likes to often sort of pretend there are no classes when there are. So with that as context, here we go. In the absence of a system of hereditary ranks and titles, without a tradition of honors conferred by a monarch, and with no well-known status ladder, even of high-class regiments, to confer various degrees of cachet, Americans have had to depend for their mechanism of snobbery far more than other peoples on their college and university hierarchy. In this country, just about all that's finally available as a fount of honor is the institution of the higher learning. This is such a big deal. He says something even of the sacred seems to attend the identification with your college. As institutions, everyone honors these colleges and universities seem to outrank the church. No one puts a sticker in the car window reading, Sodality of the Holy Name, Port Huron, Michigan, or First Baptist Church of Elmira. Actually, I think I have seen some of those, but it's far more common to see a sticker showing that, my son went to Yale, or, well, maybe not Yale, but, something like that. Um, and so much so are educational institutions respected in this country that other institutions will mimic them. When an institution devoted to profit or deception or huckstering wants to elevate its status, it pretends to be a university. So, being into politics, I particularly like this example he gave. The most naked lobbies in Washington, those most deeply dyed in the practices of bribery and coercion, like to call themselves institutes, as if they were the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton or the Institute of Contemporary Arts at the University of Pennsylvania. Thus, in the nation's capital, we find the Tobacco Institute, the Alcoholic Beverage Institute, the Institute of Shortening and Edible Oils, and the like. Some institutes even have chairs and professorships. And he gives an example, and here's an institute I've heard of often. One scribbler in a magazine holds the DeWitt Wallace Chair in Communications at the American Enterprise Institute. So high is the prestige of American colleges and universities that they have been remarkably immune to criticism and contumely, at least since the 1940s, when, because of the GI Bill, they were sold to the popular mind as the most high-minded part of the general post-war social welfare system. Okay, I'm skipping quite a bit, excuse me. So he sends I'm kind of skipping something where Edward B. Fisk in 1982 published the New York Times Selective Guide to American Colleges. And in that, he only came up with 265 of the best and most interesting colleges. And the New York Times got such heated mail about this that they backed down and pulled their name off of the guide. And he goes into some detail about the whole affair. Well, here we go. The whole affair will give you some idea of the prestige invested in academic institutions, their tenderness to slight or disregard, their jealous pursuit of honor. Their sensitivity to slight suggests that they are what we have now instead of knights or even gentlemen. Fisk's real offense was the word selective, remember in the title of his book, which blew the whistle on the polite fiction that if a thing calls itself a college or a university, it is one. The scandal he occasioned was to imply how very little meaning attaches to the statement, he or she is a college graduate, words that long years ago might have carried some weight. But by the 1950s, the scene had changed. The rush to attend college for status purposes soon resulted in the fate that overtook the concept, the dollar. The word remained unchanged, while the reality altered drastically. So he's talking about education inflation, right? Sorry, good comment from Javier Oliva. I suppose institute sounds better than griftorium. That's great. I like that. Griftorium. I'll have to remember that. Right. So he's talking about education inflation, right? And one way to think about this, I was just looking at these stats. Less than 10% of people, Americans, were graduated from a 4-year college or university or whatever in 1940. In fact, I think it was maybe closer to 6% or something. And now nearly 40% do, as of a couple of years ago, I think was the most recent number I found. So does that mean that this, six times jump in college graduates, that they're all getting the same thing that the people in 1940 were? I kind of doubt it, right? Instead, what has happened is that standards have been lowered. Institutions, as he's going to go into detail, Institutions got dubbed colleges or universities that had been called other things before, and all in this mad scrabble to say, I graduated from college, and have it mean something like what it meant in 1940. Instead, as Fussell says here, saying I'm a college graduate just got devalued, right? In a similar way that as the government prints a lot of dollars, it just makes the dollar buy less. The purchasing power of the dollar goes down and down, right? And already you can see why I called this the did I call it? Oh, the college swindle. Okay, but more on that soon. Okay. Right. Okay. So here we get into the swindle aspect of this. One of the saddest social groups today consists of that 30% that during the 1950s and 1960s struggled to go to college and thought they'd done that, only to find their prolehood still unredeemed, and not merely intellectually, artistically, and socially, but economically as well. Now these are old numbers, but he says that in a book, the authors found that going to a good college, or in this author's view, a real one, increased one's income by 52%, while going to a really good one increased it by an additional 32% over that. So you're getting real value for going to these top tier colleges, right? What we would now call top tier colleges. But here's the swindle part. They found that you achieved no income advantage if you graduated from a non-selective college. That is one of the roughly 1,728 institutions left decently unmentioned by Fisk in his Selective Colleges book. No income advantage at all. Sometimes the middle class and the proles catch on to the college swindle, but too late. So despite appearances of open access, the truth is, as Paul Bloomberg perceives, the educational system has been effectively appropriated by the upper strata and transformed into an instrument which tends to reproduce the class structure and transmit inequality. One reason is that a higher proportion than ever of top-class youths go to college, and they tend to go to the good places. They go to Swarthmore, while the proles go to Carlow College, Pittsburgh. So the effect of the whole system then is to stabilize class rigidity under the color of opening up genuine higher learning to everyone. As we all know, this has been the big push. Like, every child should graduate from college, right? And then we'll all be geniuses. I don't know what the idea is. We'll all be upper class. So how is so bold a class deception accomplished? It happened during largely the Kennedy and Johnson administrations under the guise of opening up educational opportunity. If that commodity were in rich supply and available for simple purchase, the scheme might have succeeded. This is a great passage here. Pay attention. But intelligence and learning and curiosity are regrettably rarer than some imagine. And you don't bring people into contact with them simply by announcing that you're doing it. Educational opportunity was opened up by the process of verbal inflation. By promoting, that is, numerous normal schools, teachers' colleges, provincial theological seminaries, trade schools, business schools, and secretarial institutes to the name and status of universities, thus conferring on them an identity they were by no means equipped to bear or even understand. And this is very funny. What was happening in the 1960s was simply an acceleration of a process normal in this country: inflation, hyperbole, bragging. As one citizen exulted in the 1870s, there are 2 universities in England, 4 in France, 10 in Prussia, and 37 in Ohio. So everything's a college or a university in fact, these older terms, most of which I'm familiar with, so much has been changed that I actually don't know what a normal school is. And he says we should have just stuck with that. Or let's see. Yeah, okay, I see. Okay. A normal school was a school or college for the training of teachers. Okay, so it's another term for teachers' college. I didn't even know that. So what was the result of this? Just verbal inflation. State colleges and teachers' colleges all over the country were suddenly denominated universities, and they set to work with the best motives in the world. I don't know about that, ripping off the proles. So save up, mom and dad, send your kid, they'll get a college education, and they will, rise up, right? So, more on the verbal tricks that are played here. The process of reasoning by which these institutions are conceived and born sometimes resembles the following. If universities are named for places elsewhere, like Oxford and Cambridge, if there are such things as the University of Paris and the University of London, why not put our places on the map and even confer a similar dignity on them by inventing things called the University of Evansville, or the University of Dallas, or of Houston, or of Louisville? What does it matter that no spirit of learning is visible in the place? What does it matter if curiosity and study are unknown there? Or if the very idea of intellectual rigor and excellence makes people nervous and insecure? It is a wonderful point he's making if you step back and think about it. In an organic way to do this, which would be slow, right, and wouldn't have been satisfactory to everyone pushing for opening educational opportunity. An organic way of doing this would be to, develop interest in learning somewhere, and get it to the point where it made sense to put a university in that place. You could sort of back it up with the community that existed there. Instead, as he says, they just, poof, magically dub a place a place of learning, even if there is no particular culture of learning or history of learning. Now, I am very disappointed to say that I am dropping frames. And my system had been so well behaved. Give me just a sec and just see if there's something that's misbehaving. Okay, what is killing my CPU here? Display link manager. Okay, let me try putting that over there. Sorry, technical stuff going on. Okay. Okay, no reason for that to be open. Sorry, just killing anything that is taking up CPU that shouldn't be, just in case that'll help. Oh, that's interesting. The Twitter app absolutely stomping my memory. Okay, sorry. Should have checked that before I went on air. I've been doing so great at not dropping frames. Okay, I think I'm back to good now. I don't see frames being dropped anymore. Hopefully that wasn't bad in terms of what you were hearing. Okay. Okay, so this promotion of colleges to universities is consistent with the long-honored American custom, more on this later, of raising a thing by adding the number of syllables used to describe it. This is great, and the second chapter that we'll hopefully cover today is going to go into give us a lot more examples of it. This syllabic prejudice, one might say. For example, rain is raised to precipitation. College has only 2 syllables, and even seminary only 4. But university, with 5 syllables, adds distinction. And then he gives a bunch of examples of, Upper Iowa University, Transylvania University, Kentucky. That's a cool name. and so forth. And then he talks about how this might go. So let's tell a little. He's sort of he's making it up, but sort of a sample story of the sort of thing that was going on in the post World War II era here. It's not hard to understand the way these feeble institutions take root and grow into plausibility. Near where I live, there's a large acreage, which has somehow escaped having garden apartments built all over it. Except for a few buildings in the middle, the land is as yet empty. Years ago, a sign by the roadside identified the buildings as belonging to the Consolata fathers. A few years later, a great brick building with an arched roof began to go up, together with an adjacent structure resembling a dormitory. The sign now reads, Consolata Missionaries, and one fears that something big is about to take place. I'll predict what's going to happen, and very soon, too. A few more buildings will be erected, and then an imposing entryway gate with a sign, Consolata College, will appear. A few years later, more buildings, and overnight the sign will change to Consolata University. The institution now proving its right to that title by a notable basketball team, marching band, and drill team, as well as wheelchair ramps everywhere and special programs for the handicapped. There will be a plethora of programs abroad, Consolata in Palermo, Consolata in Kusadisi, Consolata in Hyderabad. Then before you know it, you'll begin seeing in the New York Review of Books ads for books published by the Consolata University Press. Books with titles like Structuralism and George Eliot's Dilemma, and The Missing Marxist Dimension in the Writings of Samuel Johnson. Consolata University will then seem as serious as any other, and no one will think its sudden efflorescence at all funny. One of the things that has particularly come up in regards to mass immigration in Canada are the I'm sure American universities are doing something similar. A sort of a scam that the colleges have, where they get international students and charge them full price. So they're skimming like the I guess the ones who can afford it from other countries, bringing them in. Especially think like a state university where in-state students get a really nice special deal. Well, that doesn't make the university very much money. So they like to replace them with people paying full price, and it's particularly easy to get them from like out of the country, right? So many Chinese international students in the U.S., students from India, and so forth, right? So this is an aspect of the mass immigration story, and it all is down to this story he just told, right? The college wants to become a university. It wants to have more and more buildings, more and more students, grow, 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 right? Line go up. Okay. So the very topmost classes, having no need for the kind of cachet of going to a fancy university, going to an Ivy League school or something, they don't care much about where their kids go. This was surprising to me. We can say of their expectations of their children what Douglas Sutherland says of the English gentleman's. His offspring are expected to conform in all things, and academic brilliance is not an acceptable deviation from the normal. This attitude is entirely consistent with the pose of the amateur enjoined on those classes that don't have to earn money. It's a disgrace to be in any way professional, and thus, says Sutherland, a gentleman never looks under the bonnet of his motor car, the hood, where he makes a point of knowing nothing about engines. For numerous reasons, then, top out of sights and uppers most often send their kids to dubious institutions. He gives the example of Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, Vanderbilt and Whitney, both being big names that you see on certain institutions, big money names. So Cornelius's daughter and her friends go not to Vassar or Wellesley or even Northeastern or Wheaton, but to Boca Raton College, Florida. I think some of my mom's friends went there. My mom's rich friends. Right. On the other hand, archaic and good colleges like Princeton and Yale are used for status definition and support by exemplary Americans of the upper middle and middle class, like F. Scott Fitzgerald and John O'Hara. Ivy Leagues, like Harvard and Yale, still extend an irresistible appeal to the upper middle class. And even if you don't get in there, it's essential to go away, preferably some distance, to college. That's something I've wondered about. All the expense that goes into sending children to go to school far away where they live somewhere else, and get enculturated into a new culture, which, you know, as it turns out, has ended up being destructive to Western civilization. What do you know? Now, the distinctions. It is not enough to succeed, says Gore Vidal. Others must fail. It is not enough that there be a Williams College. There must also be a University of Southern Mississippi to give it value, so that both may play their parts in the great American class system of the higher learning. He doesn't think this all, I mean, he describes it in a funny way, right? But he says there's something that's not at all funny about this, and that's the psychological damage wrought by this incessant struggle for status. It's enormous just because of the extraordinary power of these institutions to confer prestige. The number of hopes blasted and hearts broken for class reasons is probably greater in the world of colleges and universities than anywhere else. He says that's true not just of students and aspiring students, kids who aim at Columbia but get admitted to Ohio Wesleyan instead. It's true of professors as well. I've never actually known a college teacher who killed himself or others because he lost status by not being retained at a most selective institution and had to move to a highly selective or merely very selective one. But I've known many college teachers thus ruined by shame and convictions of inadequacy who thenceforth devoted their lives to social envy and bitterness rather than wit and scholarship. Anyone who doesn't realize that, whether for their attenders or their conductors, colleges and universities are the current equivalent of salons and levees and courts should look harder. If no other institution here confers the titles of nobility forbidden by the Constitution, they do, or something very like it. So being a Yale man, right, or a Harvard man. Whether you learn to read at a good or bad college or at a good or bad prep school or high school, what you read is an almost infallible class signal. So now we're switching from the institution to what the different classes read. The taste in reading of the upper classes is easy. C. Wright Mills is correct when he observes that although they may display books, they tend not to read them, except books on management, and copious mystery and detective narratives, forgotten as soon as consumed. They mostly read magazines, like Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, Barron's, Dunn's Review. And then prole reading tastes are quite simple as well. There's the high prole, right? He's making the high, mid, low distinction here. The high prole Reader's Digest and TV Guide. That's high prole. Okay. Together with dailies like the New York Daily News, and then the mid and low prole weeklies like the National Enquirer, Weekly World News, Star, and Globe. And he talks about how at that mid and low prole tier, you get into, they're full of medieval wonders, magic, sheer quasi-scientific nonsense, creatures from out of space, out of body travel, the triumphs of psychics. The prole weeklies also offer their readers the comfort of lots of gossip about the secret lives of the celebrated. The point, like barroom pedantry about sports, is to provide the prole with an illusion of power, giving him a sense that it is he who controls the famous, or at least that it is he who determines which ones will succeed and fail. As readers, proles are honest, never trying to fake effects or simulate interest in higher things. It's among the middle class that tastes in reading get really interesting, because it's only here that pretense, fraud, and misrepresentation enter. Hopefully you caught that, and if you're middle class like me, you are ready for an assault that's going to go on quite a while. He is, both here and getting into the next class, he is going to really beat up the middle class. The uppers don't care what you think about their reading. Neither do the proles. The poor, anxious middle class is the one that wants you to believe it reads the best literature, and condemnatory expressions like trash or rubbish are often on its lips. And then he actually starts naming names of authors, by the way, for those who are into literary things. It is the natural audience for the unreadable, second-rate pretentious. Books by James Gould Cozens, I don't know who that is, John Steinbeck, Pearl Buck, Lawrence Durrell's Alexandria Quartet, the mass merchandise of Herman Wouk, W-O-U-K, I remember him being big when I was young, John Hersey and Irwin Shaw, and the Durant's History of Philosophy. A middle classic to perfection is The Old Man and the Sea, which Hemingway virtually was obliged to write. The middle class is mad for Dylan Thomas. Jimmy Carter said that he was his favorite poet, in large part because the records of his readings de-ideologize the poems, transforming them into something like stereo music. It is in the middle class dwelling that you're likely to spot the 54-volume set of the great books. It's the middle class is the classic market for encyclopedias. And he talks about some of the magazines the middle class likes. They want it to be non-offensive. He talked about that a lot in the last episode. Non-ideological periodicals, nice ones like the National Geographic, Smithsonian, House and Garden. Psychology Today gives the middle class the illusion that it has up-to-date scientific interests, and the New Yorker persuades it that it cares about culture and the finer things. Where proles would read Popular Mechanics, the middle class, having graduated from college, goes in for Science Digest. The more liberal a member of the middle class imagines himself, the more likely that Consumer Reports will be displayed somewhere. We must not leave the topic of the reading of the middle class without noting the impact of its audienceship on American prose style. Its terror of ideology, opinion, and sharp meaning, which we've seen before in its visual tastes, are the main cause of the euphemism, jargon, gentility, and verbal slop that wash over us. Okay, so now we're going to go from reading to writing, and then fairly briefly, and then we're going to get into speaking, but there's a lot of overlap here in terms of the comments, the insights he's going to have. Let's see. He says there's an indispensability of cliché to middle class understanding, where the more fortunately educated read to be surprised, the middle class reads to have its notions confirmed, and deviations from customary verbal formulas disconcert and annoy it. So great writing is meant to not be cliched, be interesting and surprising. And he's saying middle classes don't really want that. And this is for Christians. I thought this was particularly interesting. I shared it with a group chat I'm in with Christians. The middle class is predominantly the audience from the numerous new translations, rewritings would be a better term, of the Bible which stigmatize our age. It's notable that these new versions were not thought necessary until universal education was said to have become widespread, so unfortunately educated as to be puzzled by any form of English but the contemporary, with no sense of the history, not just of ideas, but of styles and idiom. The middle class requires that even its divinity be couched in language that is easy to understand. The middle class hates and fears language, and in effect it insists that a class separation take place between those who relish "Whither thou goest, I will go," from the Book of Ruth, and the version they like, "Where you go, I will go." This is a subtle point that I thought was very interesting. That is that he says no sense of history, not just of ideas, but of styles and idiom. This has actually been bothering me when I read some of these modern translations that he's talking about. That is, they will change a phrasing that is very familiar to my ear from the King James. It's a phrasing that has been echoed in our literature, in maybe titles of books, and they'll just change it even though it's perfectly understandable. Slightly archaic sounding, but everyone knows what it means. And it has a deep resonance for our culture. But they'll just change it to some, I don't know, less interesting, less catchy version that I guess is modernized, is the point. I mean, in some cases, I understand thee and thou being replaced with you or whatever. I get it. But in other places, I'll see a change, and I'm just like, this is not, you didn't even make it more understandable. You just made it less meaningful, culturally meaningful, So I think he makes a good point, actually. Oh, this is a bit I shared with my wife. I thought it was funny. He says the classes don't just read different things. Largely as a result of their reading, they believe different things. And it's this, as much as anything, that makes the U.S., as Richard Polenberg calls it in his book, one nation divisible. The two top classes, as we've seen, have very few ideas. It doesn't even believe in culture like the upper middle class does. The middle class, on the other hand, has lots of beliefs. This is an odd example he gives, but I thought it was quite interesting. It still believes in constipation, for example, holding that if you don't have a bowel movement daily, you're in deep trouble and should immediately swallow a laxative, preferably one advertised on TV. Just as it hopes to fend off criticism by keeping its kitchen spotlessly clean, so does the middle class with its bowels, lest some shameful dirtiness be inferred. I'm studying colon therapy, one young woman told Studs Terkel. Our system isn't clean. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to share from that. And I had asked someone about sharing something. I don't know that he got back to me. Let me see if this app can behave itself and not screw the stream up. Quit it after I check. Come on, there we go. Okay, he gave me a yes on that. Okay, so going back to the college thing, this is something that the author didn't get into. I shared something from that. And my friend Bits of Paul had this to say on college. I thought this was really interesting. One of the drivers of TFR decline, total fertility rate decline, is that college causes class clash in mate selection, wherein sex-segregated financial aid affects affects an intra-campus differential between boys' and girls' respective families' wealth. When I was in undergrad, most of the guys were taking on debt and lower middle to middle class, whereas most of the girls were on academic or athletic scholarships and from wealthier families to boot. Prime territory for the ick and failure to launch in mate selection. You can only marry the people you meet, and if the girls are higher class than the boys, it's a tough row to hoe. I thought that was a very interesting observation. All this pushing people into colleges, and then, distortive financial aid effects that he brings up. There was a time when the people who were going to Yale could intermarry, and it would make sense because they were all from a certain class, right? As well as at some other institutions, there would be sort of but he's talking about class differentials that cause problems. And of course, now, as I mentioned, we've got all these international students. So now you've got not just class differences, but you've got culture, racial, ethnic differences, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, I'll check the chat real quick, and then we'll try to cover one more chapter about speaking, how the different classes speak. Give me a second. Who said this? Daniel Hall says, every child got a telescope and chemistry set for Christmas from the 1950s to the 1980s. Yeah, I got a chemistry set. Half those kids used the telescope to peep on neighbors and drank the chemicals. A big clue about college for all. Oh, this is interesting from T. Swan. Why, yes, I do have great taste in literature. I read Harry Potter. 5 years later, after the author gets canceled, oh, yes, of course, I detest that disgusting fascist book about Harry Potter. Daniel Hall also says the uppers and the proles both know what the system really is. It's the middle class that have to believe it's all real to justify the aspirationalism and credential chasing. Um, let's see. Alphabet Cat comments basically, if you want to do well, you have to be a repeater station. Just repeat back facts, theories, quotes, and figures in parrot like fashion. Yeah, I see this when interviewing sometimes. Uh, Mirroring, I call it mirroring. Sometimes they just sort of say back to us what they think we want to hear, you know, and that doesn't work out well in the interview. Daniel Hall. That's why they love disseminators of simple received opinions that they can repeat to appear thoughtful in their circles. Yeah, in politics, we talk about the line, you know, the talking point. Everybody gets the phrase or the point to be made, repeats it, signals that they are part of that group. Boom, done. Right? No thinking. Last statue about this thing that Bits of Paul shared says assortative mating. Yes. And then Daniel Hall says, yeah, yet that's the key reason the middle class pays for college, to get their kids to marry upwards or at least stay in their class or background. Yes. And I wonder if they're getting that anymore, given that very few people seem to be getting married at this point. Okay, let's move on and do one more thing before I wrap up. One more chapter. Not necessarily, it's not going to be that brief because this is a great chapter. Maybe it's because I care about language a lot. But as painful as it is to share this with you, I thought it was really interesting. So, regardless of them, this is from the chapter, Speak That I May See Thee. Regardless of the money you've inherited, the danger of your job, the place you live, the way you look, the shape and surface of your driveway, the items on your front porch and in your living room, the sweetness of your drinks, the time you eat dinner, the stuff you buy from mail order catalogs, the place you went to school and your reverence for it, and the materials you read. That's summarizing everything he's covered in the book so far. Your social class is still most clearly visible when you say things. One's speech is an unceasingly repeated public announcement about background and social standing, says John Brooks, translating into modern American Ben Johnson's observation. Language most shows a man. Speak that I may see thee. And what held true in Johnson's 17th century holds even truer in our 20th, because we now have something virtually unknown to Johnson, a sizable middle class desperate not to offend through language, and thus addicted to such conspicuous class giveaways as euphemism, genteelism, and mock profanity. Golly. I still love the scene in the airplane where the black guys are talking real street, and one of them says she, and they're subtitling it, and it's subtitled golly. I use that sometimes on Twitter. Okay. So he does an extended thing where he talks about an Englishman trying to talk about class distinctions and how people speak and messing it up. So I'm not going to go through all his example, but here's one where he messes up. Proles say limo, he asserts. Uppers say limousine. Wrong on both counts. Proles say big black shiny cad, or sometimes caddy. Middles say limousine, and the thing would be called a limo only behind the scenes by those who supply rented ones. What then is this vehicle called by the upper orders? It's called a car, as in, we'll need the car about 11, please, Parker. The slips that this Englishman makes trying to distinguish about American use of language are useful reminders of the hazards of interpreting language class signals aright. Alexa de Tocqueville's errors in prophecy also provide a handy warning against overconfidence there. De Tocqueville overestimated the leveling force on language of democracy and imagined that this new kind of political organization would largely efface social distinctions in language and verbal style. But developments on this continent have proved him wrong about both language and democratic society. Actually, just because the country's a democracy, class distinctions have developed with greater rigor than elsewhere, and language, far from coalescing into one great central mass without social distinctions, has developed even more egregious class signals than anyone could have expected. Interviewed by sociologists, well, there's really no confusion in either language or society, as ordinary people here are quite aware. Interviewed by sociologists, they indicate that speech is the main way they estimate a stranger's social class when they first encounter him. Really, says one American, the first time a person opens his mouth, you can tell. So he says the class system is more complicated than in England, less amenable to merely binary categorization, but he tries to throw some absolute class dividers out here. So, probably the most important, a usage firmly dividing the prole classes from the middle and upper hires is the double negative, as in, I can't get no satisfaction. Next in importance would rank special ways of managing grammatical number, as in, he don't and I wants it. And these are not just slips or errors, they signal virtually a different dialect, identifying speakers socially distinct from users of the other English. The two can respect each other, but they can never be pals. They belong to different classes, and if they attempt to mix, they will inevitably regard each other as quaint and not quite human. I really like his writing. If it's grammar that draws the line between middles and below, it's largely pronunciation and vocabulary that draws it between the middles and above. So he gives some suggestions here. Words employed to register or advertise cultural experience are especially dangerous for the middle class. Even crepes, which they pronounce crepes. The same with most words deployed to display one's familiarity with the foreign, like fiancé, which the middle class prefers to boyfriend and delivers with a ridiculous heavy stress on the final syllable, fiancé. The same with chauffeur, a word it prefers to the upper class driver. The word diamond, pronounced as 2 syllables by uppers, is likely to be rendered as 3 by the middle class. Diamond? I wonder which one I say. Having just read this, I'm really self-conscious about how I'm pronouncing words right now. Similarly with beautiful, 3 syllables to uppers, but to middles, beautiful. The grand words, exquisite, despicable, hospitable, lamentable, invite the middle class to stress the second syllable. Exquisite, despicable, hospitable, lamentable. Is that what I was doing? Anyway, those anxious to leave no doubt of their social desirability stress the first. As the middle class gets itself more deeply entangled in artistic experience, hazards multiply, like patina, a word it likes a lot, but doesn't realize it's stressed on the first syllable. So I think it's actually pronounced patina, which I didn't know. See, I told you this is a dagger in my heart, this chapter. High-class names from cultural history pose a similar danger, especially if they are British, like Henry Purcell. President Reagan's advisor, which I probably just mangled, President Reagan's advisor Edwin Meese III clearly signaled his class. When interviewed on television, he chose to exhibit his gentility by using the word salutary instead of the common wholesome or healthy, but indicated by his pronunciation that he thought the word salutary. That's the pure middle-class act. Opt for the showy, and in so doing, take a pratfall. Elegance is the fatal temptation for the middle class, dividing it from the blunter usages of uppers and proles alike. Yeah, and he says elegance, but as you'll see, there's a lot of, how do I put it? Oh, great. I'm now dropping frames again for some reason. Excuse me just a sec. Let me see if I can figure out why. Who's being naughty? Give me a sec. I keep quitting things until it behaves. Okay, what else is taking up? Amazon is killing me. Okay, sorry. Oh, great. Would this hurt anything if I quit my browser? I don't think it will. It's going to quit the whole thing. Sorry about this. Darn, I thought I'd solved the drop frames thing, and here I go again. Sorry. Moving as quickly as I can to kill some things. Oh, Discord can be nasty. Let's get rid of that. And to kill that, and I failed. Okay. Are we behaving yet? Let's see. Okay, seem to have stabilized again. Sorry about that. Now I can't see comments because I killed. Okay, that's all right. I'll relaunch and just bring up the stream. Where's the stream? Technical difficulties, folks. Trying to make it not painful to listen to this. Okay. Okay. Hopefully we are going to behave. All right. Not dropping frames anymore. Ooh. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Thanks for your patience. All right. So, right. Elegance is the fatal temptation for the middle class. The middle class is where you hear prestigious a lot. And to speculate about the reason it's replaced distinguished or noted or respected in the past 20 years is to do a bit of national soul searching. The implications of prestige, C. Wright Mills observes, are really pejorative. In its origins, he says, it means dazzling the eye with conjuring tricks. Isn't there a movie called The Prestige? And it's about that sort of thing, magicians. In France, prestige carries an emotional association of fraudulence, of the art of illusion, or at least of something adventitious. The same in Italy and Germany. Only in the USA does the word carry any prestige. So some of these class dividers are crude, others are subtle. The upper and upper middle classes have a special vocabulary for indicating wearisome or unhappy social situations. They say tiresome or tedious, where their social inferiors would say boring. They say upset or distressed or even cross, where others would say angry or mad or sore. There's a special upper class diction of approval also. No prole man would call something super or outstanding, just as it would sound like flagrant affectation for a prole woman to designate something seen in a store as divine or darling or adorable. And nice would be the non-upper way of putting it. But it's the middle class quest for grandeur and gentility that produces the most interesting effects. Here he goes again, slamming the middle class. As we've seen, imported words especially are its downfall. It will speak of a graffiti, and it thinks chauvinism has something to do with gender aggression. Pseudo-classical plurals are a constant pitfall. The middles will speak learnedly of a phenomena, and a criteria, and a strata, and referring perhaps to a newspaper, a media. A well-known author is a literati. It thinks context, a grander form of the word content, and thus says things like, I didn't like the context of that book, all that blood and gore. The whole middle-class performance nicely illustrates the conclusion of Lord Melbourne. The higher and lower classes There's some good in them, he observed. But the middle classes are all affectation and conceit and pretense and concealment. Whew. Stabbed in the heart. Now, all classes, except sometimes upper middle, are implicated in the scandal of saying home when they mean house. The word home was fervently embraced by the customers of real estate businesses for several reasons. First, the middle class loves to use words which have achieved cliche status in advertising. Second, the middle class, like the real estate con men, also enjoys the comforting fantasy that you can purchase love, comfort, warmth, etc. with cold cash. Third, the middle class, by nature both puritanical and terrified of public opinion, welcomed home because to its dirty mind, house carried bad associations. One spoke of a rest home, but of a bawdy, whore, fancy, or sporting house. No one ever heard of a home of ill fame, or for that matter, a cat home. So out went house for the same reason that madam has never really caught on in middle-class America. He says there is one exception. You always say a beach house. You never say a beach home, for whatever reason. Homes are what the middle class lives in. As it grows progressively poorer, it sells its homes and moves into mobile homes, formerly trailers, or motor homes. Because of its need for the illusion of power and success that attend self-conscious consumerism, the middle classes instinctively adopt advertisers' wear compounds, speaking with no embarrassment whatever of the family's footwear, nightwear or sleepwear, leisure wear, storm wear, beach wear, swimwear, city wear, country wear, campus wear, formal wear, eyewear, that is spectacles, neckwear, etc. And they feel good uttering the analogous WARE compounds: tableware, dinnerware, stemware, barware, flatware, kitchenware, glassware. Or sometimes, when they get into their grand mood, crystal. Uppers, whom the middles think they're imitating, actually say glasses. Get out the glasses. Right? Advertising diction feeds so smoothly into the middle class psyche because of that class's bent toward rhetorical fake elegance. Aspiring to ascend, it imagines that verbal grandeur will forward the process. Thus, enormity, salutary, duplicity, and of course, gourmet. And he quotes here from, let's see, language of a flyer circulated recently to advertise a new magazine aimed at a northeastern suburb. He leaves out, names the guilty, the area, and the magazine. The greater whatever area represents a way of life. It is a lifestyle. It is fine living. Crystal for a special dinner. A gourmet restaurant. The joy of a well-written book. It is life at its best. Quiet elegance. Creative. Beauty and grace. Our magazine will let you share in the dreams, talents, contributions, and achievements of a community of people who stand apart from the crowd and set high standards for themselves. Our magazine is for intelligent, sensitive men, women, and children. Our magazine is you. One could search widely without locating a more exemplary fusion of insecurity and snobbery, the one propping up the other to produce that delicate equilibrium which sustains the middle class. Insecurity and snobbery. Oh, wow. He's rough. What am I doing here? Where's my pointer? There we go. Trying to move that over where I can see it better. See the chat better. Okay. Cornball elegant also is the rhetoric of the airlines and of airports whose clients are 90% middle class. If one couldn't infer the hopeless middle classness of airports from their special understanding of the ideas of comfort, convenience, and luxury, one could from their pretentious language. On the aircraft itself, virtually everything said or written accords with the middle-class insistence that words shall be bogus, from such formulations as motion discomfort and flotation device to beverages and non-dairy creamer. On a recent flight from New York to London, a steward announced, Smoking is not permitted while you are making usage of the lavatory facilities. A perfect example, almost a definition of the middle-class pseudo-elegant style. And then he reads from a TWA flight's menu. Filet tips Dijonnaise, tidbits of beef tenderloin in a mild, creamy mustard sauce, presented with pomme chateau and petit pois. Another meal is said to be complemented by buttered broccoli. But, and then he says a civilized person would say no smoking in the toilets, but toilets does not recommend itself to middle-class speakers who prefer lavatories or restrooms, euphemism as well as elegance being their hallmarks. One of their treasured possessions is a whole vocabulary of euphemized profanity and obscenity, so that when you hear holy cow or holy Moses, or that someone has done a whale of a job, you know that a member of the middle class is nearby. It's hard to believe that after the numerous strains and scandals of the mid-20th century, any relic survived of that class that used to say, oh, pshaw, or botheration, when it meant not just, oh, hell, but shit. But we find the American Brigadier General Dozier back home after weeks of bondage and humiliation at the hands of the most cruel and vicious Italian kidnappers saying, it's doggone good to be home. I think Lynch did quite a good job of having fun with this with Special Agent Dale Cooper, who would use that kind of, middle class euphemistic kind of language, but in a super sincere way, right? Which just made it funnier. It's the middle class that insists still that pregnant be replaced by expecting or starting a family. Being in a family way, on the other hand, is prole. And the middle class has virtually legislated that all the rest of us make love instead of what we used to do. In the face of all this, the uppers stand firm. Jilly Cooper reports, I once heard my son regaling his friends. Mummy says pardon is a much worse word than fuck. And of course, the middle is where you hear false teeth called dentures, the rich called the wealthy, and dying called passing away or passing over. Proles are likely to be taken to Jesus. Drunks are people with alcohol problems. The stupid are slow learners or underachievers. Madness is mental illness. Drug use is drug abuse. The crippled are the handicapped, sometimes by a euphemism of a euphemism, the challenged. A slum is the inner city, and a graveyard is a cemetery, or among those more susceptible to advertising, a memorial park. Now, this is quite interesting when he said challenged, right? Because that became the big joke about even going back, I think, to the 90s with political correctness before they started talking about woke, that height challenged or whatever. This is woke, or this is politically correct. Well, it sounds like it was just middle class. Not wanting to be direct, right? And being sort of indirect about it and polite. The middles cleave to euphemisms, not just because they're an aid in avoiding facts. They like them also because they assist their social yearnings toward pomposity. This is possible because most euphemisms permit the speaker to multiply syllables, and the middle class confuses sheer numerousness with weight and value. Jonathan Swift amused himself by imagining spoken syllables as physical entities with weight, density, specific gravity, and other purely physical attributes. Instead of now, the middle class will say weightily, as of this time, and instead of later, subsequently. It's like the middle class trick of dressing up to go shopping. Hugh Rawson, in his invaluable Dictionary of Euphemisms and Other Double Talk, delivers the essential principle. The longer the euphemism, the better. As a rule, euphemisms are longer than the words they replace. They have more letters, they have more syllables, and frequently, two or more words will be deployed in place of a single one. This is partly because the tabooed Anglo-Saxon words tend to be short, and partly because it almost always takes more words to evade an idea than to state it directly and honestly. This is quite interesting, right? Because what he's talking about is the very opposite of what Tolkien said. He said you should favor the Anglo-Saxon parts of English, tend to use those shorter words. They're more direct, they're punchier, they're more, he felt they, how do I put it, more soulful. They appealed to something more rooted in us than the Latinate words that came in through French's influence in English. So this is great fun. Hugh Rawson goes on to develop a nice pseudo-social scientific fog or pomposity index, the FOP index, right? By which a euphemism's relation to the word or phrase it replaces can be quantified. High numbers indicating the greatest multiplication of syllables or euphemistic success. We won't get into the arithmetical details that he works out. We can just note that the FOP index of prostitute in relation to whore is 2.4, and in relation to harlot, 1.4. One of the highest FOP indexes, Rawson notes, is earned by the designation personal assistant to the secretary, parentheses, special activities, given to his cook by a former cabinet member. This euphemism registers a FOP number of 17.8, which must be close to an all-time record. Let's see, more examples. So terrified of being judged socially insignificant as your typical member of the middle class, so ambitious of earning a reputation as a judicious thinker, indeed almost an executive, that it's virtually impossible for him to resist the temptation constantly to multiply syllables. He thus euphemizes willy-nilly. So he answers not that he's a junk man, or even in the junk business, but in the scrap iron business, or even the recycling business, or reclamation industry. Occupational euphemisms always seem to entail multiplication of syllables. In many universities, what used to be the bursar is now the disbursement officer. Just the way what used to be an undertaker, already sufficient as a euphemism, one would think, is now a funeral director, an advance of 2 whole syllables. Selling is raised to retailing, or marketing, or even better, to merchandising. The person on the telephone who used to provide information now gives, or more often does not give, directory assistance, which is 2 syllables grander. Some sociologists surveying the status of occupations found that druggist ranked 6th out of 15. But when a syllable was added and the designation changed to pharmacist, the occupation moved up to 4th place. Syllable multiplication usually occurs also in the euphemisms by which the middle class softens hard facts, or cheerfulizes actuality. Cheerfulizes. Great term he made up there. It's all in aid of avoiding anything depressing. Thus, correctional facility for prison, work stoppage or industrial action for strike, discomfort for pain, homicide for murder, self-deliverance for suicide, fatality for death. Slum clearance, 3 syllables, becomes urban renewal, 5. Nuclear device has it over atom bomb, both by a lot of euphemism and by 2 full syllables. When you call a tip a gratuity, you take a little of the sting out. And then he just gives a great list here. The occasions when the middle class can, in its view, achieve high status by multiplying syllables are virtually infinite. Here we can list only a few more examples. It is thought more impressive to say cocktails than drinks, individuals than people, position than job, albeit than although, roadway than road, purchase than buy, conflagration than fire, billiard parlor than pool room, launder than wash, affluent than rich or loaded, commence than start, currently than now, massive than big, meet with or meet up with than just meet, proceed than go, request than ask, subsequently than later, terminate than end, utilize than use, at the local level rather than locally. The passive voice is a great help to the middle class in multiplying syllables. Thus, the TV newsman will say, no injuries were reported, 8 syllables, when he means no one was hurt, a measly 4. Pseudo-Latinism is another useful technique. In colleges has a measly 4 syllables, but in academia has 6. just as in the suburbs has 4, but in suburbia has 5. We can infer the middle class rather than prole origins of most terrorist groups. I really like this, going back to the left-wing terrorist series. He's exactly right here about their class and about the way they use language. We can infer the middle class rather than prole origins of most terrorist groups by their habit of leaving behind after their outrages communiques rather than notes or even messages. You know we're serious, we left-wing nutzos, because we left you a communique. Oh, very nice. One man asked by Coleman and Rainwater if he's better off than his father answers yes and explains, I have an MA and my father just finished high school. This has meant that I am able to engage in higher paying areas of employment. He could have just said, this has meant that I can earn more. The ad for TV's Brideshead Revisited says, this week Sebastian's drinking problems grow worse. They could have just said, Sebastian's drinking grows worse. Now, he starts with the middle class. He thinks that's where the problem of this sort of, euphemization, increase of syllables begins, but it's creeped out to other classes. The words he uses are, it spreads out and infects other classes. We'll never know who conceived that vocalist was a more impressive word than singer, but now, regardless of class, any American is likely to ask, who's the vocalist on that record? On the pediment of the Supreme Court building are the words, equal justice under law. E.J. Applewhite points out that people secure in their reputation for seriousness, wisdom, and social adequacy would not have multiplied syllables, but inscribed simply justice, having scrutinized the 5 extra syllables and perceived that all were implied in that one simple word. But being Americans, they were afraid someone would find them elemental and modest, and thus socially unsatisfactory unless they canted it up. So, before we look at the proles, a few more middle-class signals. An excessive fondness for metaphors is one. Things like grinding to a halt, or running the gamut, or boggling the mind, which are never recognized as cliches, and indeed, if they were so recognized, would be treasured all the more. His sarcasm is hurting me. Okay, middle-class speakers are also abnormally fond of acronyms. The middle class likewise thinks quite elegant the expression over drinks or over coffee or over dinner rather than with or at. Let's discuss it over drinks. It's the impulse toward metaphor again, fancier than the literal. The class is not anxious about their own sophistication, would more likely say, let's have a drink and talk about it. A similar impulse to splendor motivates the middle class to inscribe regrets only on their social invitations, where the more unpretending classes would say no's only. As middles grow worse educated, they tend to employ more pretentious pseudo-scientific terms to dignify the ordinary, or to suggest noble purpose in normal or commonplace behavior. The word parenting is an example. And this is one I shared on Twitter, this sentence. Saying parenting is virtually the equivalent of telling us on your bumper that you always brake for small animals. When we hear speakers entirely careless of the former distinction between less and fewer, less white prisoners are in our penal institutions today, or bothering to add the is concerned or goes to the phrase as far as the Republican Party is concerned or goes, we know we're approaching the idiomatic world identifiable as prole. Okay, got through his slamming of the middle class, and let's move on to another class that he picks on. Proles signal their identity partly by pronunciation, like the Texan on the Buckley Show who said promiscuity instead of promiscuity. Proles drop the G on present participles, saying it's a fucking shame, as well as the ED on past participles. Thus, corned beef becomes corn beef, or better, corn beef. We hear also a bottle beer instead of bottled beer, dark skin people, old-fashioned baked beans, and mother's high-power beer. First come, first serve is a favorite axiom. Roger Price, the student of Rubes or Urban Hicks, has located more prole pronunciations. he observes that in Southern California, even newscasters say wonderful and antibiotics and interesting. The word interesting, pronounced in this manner, with the accent on the third syllable, is the infallible mark of the rube, or as we call it, the prole. Other signs of rubehood are saying fac for fact, for fewer, present for president, oni for only, finey for finally, and intellectual for non-democratic. To say entire, like the Reverend Rex Humbard, the TV evangelist, is to indicate that you're a high or mid prole. But to say meringue, when you mean the foamy egg white stuff on top of pies, is low prole. Proles of all types have terrible trouble with the apostrophe, and its final disappearance from English, which seems imminent, will be a powerful indication that the proles have won. Now, obviously, this is easier to read than to speak, but really quick, I'll just say that he says sometimes the apostrophe vanishes, like ladies' toilet with no apostrophe to be seen. Sometimes it's thrown in. He says, as if the little mark were somehow missed, it or something like it is invoked anomalously as if its function were like underlining. Your driver, Tom Bedricki, today's specials, tipping permitted, right? There used to be a Twitter account where they would show a bunch of examples of things being put in quotes where it just made no sense that they were in quotes. Trolls like to use words that normally appear only in newspapers. They don't realize that no one calls the Pope the Pontiff, except in pretentious journalese, or a senator a lawmaker, or the United States the nation, or a scholar an educator. Now, this last one he wants to focus in on, getting back to this college education stuff. This last is not objected to by high school teachers and administrators who rather embrace it as an elevating professional euphemism. I'm an educator, right? It's purely for social class reasons that university professors object to being denominated educators, because the term fails to distinguish them from high school superintendents, illiterate young teachers with temporary credentials, and similar pedagogic riffraff. The next time you meet a distinguished university professor, especially one who fancies himself well known nationally for his ideas and writings, tell him it's an honor to meet such a famous educator, and watch. First he will look down for a while, then up, but not at you, then away, and very soon he will detach himself from your company. He will be smiling all the time, but inside he will be in torment. I'm just an educator. He says, a writer in the London Sunday Times not long ago testified to hearing that attempts were being made to pervert a strike, and that somewhere a priest has been called in to circumcise a ghost. Continuing from the London Sunday Times, readers notify me of the lady with a painful ulster in her mouth. The shrines you can see in Catholic countries in commemoration having trouble keeping a straight face, of St. Mary Magdalene. The police at the scene of a crime who threw an accordion round the street. The touching sight of the deceased George V laying in state on a catapult. The student who was always to be found embossed in a book. The pilot who left his aircraft by means of the ejaculation seat. The drowning swimmer who was revived by means of artificial insemination. And the rainbow, which was said by an onlooker to contain all the colors of the rectum. Sorry. Oh. You're likely to hear from high prole speakers the word penultimate used to mean absolutely the last, as opposed to next to last, or absolutely the most, as in nuclear weapons are the penultimate threat. A serious moment in cultural history occurred a few years ago, marking a significant takeover of public rhetoric by proles. I'm referring to gasoline trucks changing the warning word on the rear from inflammable to flammable. Widespread public education had at last produced a population which no longer recognized the prefix "in" as an intensifier. Let's see. If unexpected silence is one sign of the upper classes, noise and vociferation identify the proles, who shout "Wahoo!" at triumphant moments in games, largely hockey and pro football, they attend. Speaking to Studs Terkel, a Chicago policeman, probably high prole, indicates his awareness of one important distinction between his class and those below him. If my mother and father argued, he reports, my mother went around shutting down the windows because they didn't want the neighbors to hear him. But they, the lower sort of proles, deliberately open the doors and open the windows, screaming and hollering. The prole must register his existence and his presence in public. Noise is a form of overstatement. Thus, minimal utterance is high class, while proles say everything 2 or 3 times. Is a frequently heard complete sentence among the uppers. Let's see. Almost done here. By what other language signs are proles to be known? By their innocence of the objective case, for one thing. Recalling vaguely that it is polite to mention oneself last, as in he and I were there, proles applying this principle uniformly come up with between he and I. Should be between he and me. There's also a prole problem with like. They tend to say they feel like there's something bad about like, so they'll say, replace it with as. He looks as his father. Another prole signal is difficulty with a complex sentence, resulting in structures displaying elaborate pseudo-correct participles like, being that it was a cold day, the furnace was on. Because the gerund is beyond their reach, they are forced to multiply words and say, the people in front of him at the show got mad due to the fact that he talked so much, instead of his talking at the show annoyed the people in front. People, however, is not quite right. They might say individuals. The individuals in front of him at the show, right? Proles adore being called Mr. First Name Prole. Thus, we hear of Mr. Frank Sinatra and Mr. Howard Cosell. Now, if each class has one word it responds to uniquely, the upper class probably likes secure or liquid best. The word of the upper middle class is right, as in doing the right thing. I do want everything right for Muffy's wedding. The middle class likes right too, but the word that really excites the middles is luxury. Those beautiful luxury one-room apartments. Spotless, floors, linens, bowels, is also a middle class favorite. High proles are suckers for easy terms, 6 easy lessons. And the word of the classes below is free. We never go to anything that's not free, as the low prole housewife said. And then final bit, and then I'll stop. A very little attention to the different idioms of the classes should persuade the most sentimental not only that there is a tight system of social classes in this country, but that linguistic class lines are crossed only rarely and with great difficulty. A virtually bottomless social gulf opens between those who say, have a nice day, and those who say, on the other hand, goodbye. Those who, when introduced, say, pleased to meet you, and those who say, how do you do? There may be some passing intimacy between those who think momentarily means in a moment, airline captain over loudspeaker, will be taking off momentarily, folks, and those who know it means for a moment. But it won't survive much strain. It's like the tenuous relation between people who conceive that type as an adjective, she's a very classy type person, and people who know it's only a noun or verb. The sad thing is that by the time one's an adult, these stigmata are virtually unalterable and ineffaceable. We're pretty well stuck for life in the class we're raised in. Even adopting all the suggestions implied in this chapter, embracing all the high-class locutions and abjuring the low ones, won't help much. You're going to open your mouth. People are going to know what class you are. It's just the way it is. All right, so let's see any other comments. Thanks, Raging Mandrill says, this is great. Agreed. I read so much that chapter because I just loved it. So funny and interesting, and of course it just attunes you to notice things that you might not notice otherwise. I love the new, T. Swan says, I love the new middle-class euphemism, short kings, as seen from AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lately. Aquila says, I'm not fat, I'm horizontally challenged. The last statue says, eschew obscurantism. Cheerfulize is a great word, says T. Swan. I agree, going to remember that one. T. Swan says, I think he's on to something with this syllabalism thing. Agreed. Aquila Fotia says, shell shock versus post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's see. Daniel Hall. Jorge is an illegal migrant. George is an expatriate who has forgotten to renew his visa documentation. Let's see. Da, da, da. UK proles pronounce nuclear as nuclear. I've heard that. Mark Vrem says nuclear. That's the Los Alamos pronunciation too. Mark Vrem says nowadays we've got TikTok and Instagram for loudness. Right. Okay. So I think those are the main comments. Boy, I hope no one left anything else because I closed all my. Well, okay. Give me just a sec. I'll reopen my super chat windows and stuff. Just make sure I'm not missing anything. Try to be faithful here. Nope. And nope. Okay, good. And then I think I'm done. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask someone to join me because to finish this series off, because the very last sections are called climbing and sinking and prole drift and the X way out. So this has to do with moving among classes and the spread of the practices of certain class to other classes. I have a guest in mind who won't surprise you very much. Don't want to say his name because I haven't asked him yet, but I think I'd like him to join because that last bit is pretty short compared to what I just covered. It's about 1/2 of what I just covered today. So I think I could have a guest. We could go through that material and ask him to comment. I think he'll have some great comments. Having gotten through, the bulk of the book and really established what Fussell is thinking about as he talks about these classes and the various signifiers that he's looking at, right? And his firm insistence that class is a lot more static than Americans like to think. We like to, the self-made man, right? That's America. It's all about the self-made man. And he's saying that that's not that it never happens, but in terms of actually changing your class, it's a little more complicated than you might think. Okay, I think that's it, right? Yeah, oh yeah. In the first left out a lot, but in response to someone's comment, this is Fussell specifically said early in the book that he wasn't really going to get into racial differences, which is just another level of complexity to bring in. He's just going to focus on class differences. So some of those things sounded to me like stuff I would hear from the ghetto folks that I worked with, black ghetto folks that I worked with in North St. Louis, simply because they have speech patterns that are similar to white low-class proles. But I have to say, most of the book, it basically sounds like he's talking about different classes of white Americans. That was my impression. He's not spending much time on other classes. That would be kind of a different exercise, I think, to get those racial distinctions as separated from the class distinctions. So that's how I read it. But anyway, yeah, Daniel Hull says, we like to believe that financial class has fully supplanted social class. And in the first episode in the series, he made very clear that that's not true. And someone can just be sort of broke, but still be an upper in terms of all these other signifiers we're talking about, the way they speak and what they read and so on and so forth, right? So one's liquid cash position is not exactly what he's getting at when he talks about class. Okay, let's stop there. Like I said, there'll be one more episode on this. I will have to see about the guest I'm thinking of, but if that works out, might just finish it up next week to have this done. And then we'll get back to some of our regularly scheduled programming, like in Econ Minis with Black Horse and I don't know what with the series on the U.S.-Israel relationship, I thought I got pretty spicy. I don't know where to go from there, what's the next most spicy thing I can do, suggestions welcome. Yeah, T. Swan says, white Southerners and blacks have many similarities in their speech, but I feel like those are diverging more over time. That's right, but they learn to speak English. Africans learn to speak English from white Southerners and probably a particular class of white Southerners, right? So yeah, absolutely. They started from the same point and then there's been some divergence since then, but you still hear similarities in the way they pronounce things and the words they use and stuff like that. I've certainly noticed that. All right, great stuff, entertaining stuff. Oh, show it one more time. Pluck the Book, Class by Paul Fussell. It's not long. It's less than 200 pages. I'm sharing with you a lot, but certainly not all of it. If you're finding this interesting, get it. It's a quick read, and it's just delightful. I'm just, as you've heard, I just laugh and laugh while I'm reading it to myself. And then I laugh when I try to read it out loud, share it out loud with you guys. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for your support, and see you next time.